I didn't find out my wife was lying because she slipped up or confessed. I found out because a hotel receipt sitting in her purse had my name printed on it in clean black ink, except I had never stepped foot in that hotel, not once, not ever, and that's the kind of detail that doesn't just raise questions, it rewrites everything you thought you knew about your own life. My name is Ethan Carter, I'm 39 years old. I work as a senior project manager for a construction firm just outside Chicago. The kind of job where you measure everything twice because mistakes cost real money, real time, real consequences. And for the last 11 years I believed my marriage worked the same way, steady, predictable, built on trust you don't second guess. Olivia and I weren't flashy people. We had a 2-story house in Naperville, a gray SUV in the driveway, neighbors who waved but never stayed long. The kind of life that looks quiet from the outside but feels earned when you're living it. We had routines, Friday takeout, Sunday grocery runs, small habits that stitched the weeks together, and maybe that's why what happened didn't hit like an explosion, it felt more like a crack forming under something solid, subtle at first, easy to ignore if you wanted to. It started 3 Thursdays ago, when Olivia texted me around 6 saying she'd be late, just dinner with a friend, nothing unusual, no explanation needed. Her words were casual, almost rehearsed, and I remember staring at the message longer than I should have, not because it was suspicious, but because it felt empty, like a sentence missing weight. I typed back, "Okay, drive safe," and went back to my laptop. Numbers, schedules, deadlines, things that made sense, things that stayed where you put them. She came home around 10:30 that night, heels in her hand, hair slightly out of place. She kissed my cheek and said traffic was terrible, same tone, same calm, nothing dramatic. And I nodded like any husband would. Because there was nothing to argue with, nothing to point at, just a normal night ending like any other. But the next morning everything shifted in a way I didn't understand yet. I was grabbing her purse from the kitchen counter to move it out of the way while I made coffee, nothing intentional, just habit, and that's when it slipped, a folded piece of paper sliding halfway out of the side pocket. I almost didn't notice it, almost left it there. But something about the way it caught the light made me stop. I picked it up, unfolded it once, then again, and for a second my brain didn't process what I was looking at. It was a hotel receipt. Standard layout, date, time, room number, total charge, and then, right there under guest name, it said Ethan Carter, clean, undeniable, printed like fact, except I hadn't booked a room, I hadn't checked in, I hadn't been anywhere near that place. And standing there in my own kitchen with coffee brewing behind me and morning light coming through the window, I realized something wasn't just wrong, it was constructed, deliberate. Like someone had taken my name and placed it exactly where it didn't belong, and in that moment I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel panic. I felt something colder, quieter, the kind of stillness that comes when your instincts tell you the truth is already in motion, and you're just now catching up to it. I did not confront her that morning. Not because I was afraid of what she would say, but because I already knew she would say exactly what she needed to say to keep everything looking normal, and normal had suddenly become something I did not trust, so I folded the receipt back along the same crease lines, slid it into the side pocket of her purse, and placed it exactly where I found it. Like resetting a scene before anyone realizes it has been disturbed. Then I poured my coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and listened to the quiet hum of the house like it might tell me something I had missed. Olivia came downstairs 15 minutes later, dressed for work, hair pulled back, that same composed version of herself I had seen 1,000 mornings before. She smiled, kissed my cheek, asked if I wanted eggs, and for a moment I watched her like she was a stranger performing a role I used to recognize. I said no, just coffee. And she nodded, casual, unbothered, like there was nothing in her purse that could tear through 11 years of marriage. She moved around the kitchen with that same rhythm, opening cabinets, setting plates, the ordinary sounds filling the space between us, and I realized something that settled deeper than the receipt itself. She was not acting different, which meant whatever had happened last night was not a mistake, it was something she had already accepted as part of her life. I asked her how dinner was, kept my tone even, steady, the way I would ask about any other night, and she did not hesitate. She said it was good, just catching up, nothing special, the kind of answer that closes a conversation before it starts, And I nodded again, took a sip of coffee, and let the silence sit there because pushing would only give her a reason to build something stronger around the truth. After she left for work, I stayed at the table longer than I needed to, staring at the empty chair across from me, replaying every small detail I could remember from the past few months, the late nights that had reasonable explanations, the phone calls she took in the other room, the way she started placing her phone face down without thinking. None of it had felt like proof at the time, just fragments that did not connect. But now, with that receipt sitting in my head like a fixed point, everything began to shift around it. I went upstairs, opened my laptop, and did something I had never done before in our marriage. I started checking. Not because I wanted to become that kind of husband, but because the version of me who trusted without question no longer matched the reality I was standing in. I logged into our shared accounts first. Nothing unusual, bills paid, grocery charges, the same predictable pattern. Then I checked our credit card statements more closely, scrolling slower this time, looking for anything that felt out of place. And that is when I saw it, a charge from a hotel downtown, same name printed on the receipt. Same date, same amount, and the timestamp was late. Long after dinner would have ended, I leaned back in my chair and let out a slow breath because that was the moment the doubt turned into something heavier, something structured. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a timeline, and timelines do not lie. I closed the laptop, sat there in the quiet house, and realized that whatever Olivia thought she was keeping simple had already become something far more complicated than either of us had said out loud. I did not go back to work that day, not right away. Because once you see a pattern forming, you either ignore it or you follow it, and I have never been the kind of man who ignores a structural crack when I know it can bring everything down. So instead I grabbed my keys, got in my truck, and drove downtown without telling anyone where I was going. The address from the charge was already in my head, a mid-range hotel near the river. The kind of place business travelers use when they want something decent but not memorable. Which made it worse somehow because it meant there was intention without attention, not a mistake, not an accident, just a quiet decision repeated enough times to become routine. I parked across the street and sat there for a minute watching people move in and out of the lobby, rolling suitcases, checking their phones, living normal lives that had nothing to do with mine. And then I walked inside like I belonged there, calm, steady, the way I handle client meetings when I already know the outcome and just need confirmation. The lobby smelled like polished wood and coffee, soft music playing overhead, everything designed to feel neutral, forgettable. I approached the front desk and asked a simple question, kept it professional, told them I needed a copy of a receipt for a recent stay under my name because it had not shown up correctly in my expense records. The woman behind the desk smiled the way people do when they think they are helping with something routine. She asked for identification, I handed it over, and for a few seconds I watched her type, click, scroll, small movements that suddenly felt louder than they should have. Then she nodded and said yes, she found the reservation, same date, same charge, same room number, and she printed it out without hesitation because as far as she was concerned everything matched, everything made sense. I took the paper from her, thanked her, and stepped aside. Not wanting to read it right there under bright lights where everything felt too exposed, I walked back outside, stood near the edge of the sidewalk, and unfolded the receipt slowly, like I was giving myself time to be wrong. But the details did not change, they sharpened. Check-in time was 8:47 p.m., checkout time was 2 hours later, room paid in full, guest name Ethan Carter, and then there was something else. Something I had not seen before, a partial credit card number. The last 4 digits, and they were not mine. I know my numbers the same way I know my own phone number, repetition, habit, certainty. And these were not them, which meant whoever checked and used my name but not my card. And that detail shifted everything again because it meant this was not just carelessness, it was deliberate separation, identity on one side, payment on another. I looked up at the building, at the rows of identical windows, and for the first time I felt something close to clarity, not relief, not anger, just a clean understanding that I was dealing with something constructed layer by layer, and the person who knew me well enough to use my name like that was not a stranger, it was someone who lived in my house, someone who knew exactly how far to go without setting off alarms, and standing there with that receipt in my hand, I realized I was not walking into a mistake I could talk through. I was stepping into a situation that had already been planned, and the only question left was how much of it had been happening before I ever thought to look. I drove home slower than usual, not because of traffic but because my mind was running ahead of me, connecting pieces that had never meant anything before, and now refused to stay disconnected. The receipt was folded in my jacket pocket, not hidden, not exposed, just there like a quiet weight reminding me that whatever I thought my life was yesterday no longer existed in the same form today. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked exactly the same as it always did, clean lines, trimmed lawn, the kind of place that suggests stability without ever saying it out loud, and for a moment I sat in the truck with the engine off, staring at the front door like it might open on its own and explain everything without me having to ask, but it stayed closed, silent, just another part of a structure I had trusted without inspection. I went inside, set my keys on the counter, and walked through each room slowly, not searching for anything specific but noticing everything differently. The couch where we watched movies, the dining table where we had dinners that now felt like scenes from someone else's life. Even the hallway felt narrower, like the space itself had shifted to match what I knew. I went upstairs and stood in the bedroom doorway, looking at the bed, the nightstands, the small details that make a place personal, and I realized something that settled deeper than anything I had felt so far. Nothing in this house had changed, which meant the only thing that had ever been uncertain was what I believed about it. I sat on the edge of the bed and let the silence stretch out, not rushing to fill it, not reaching for my phone, just letting my thoughts move at their own pace. And they did not move in straight lines, they looped, replaying moments I had dismissed before. Olivia stepping outside to take calls, her sudden interest in working late, the way she had started dressing slightly differently without ever making it obvious. None of it had been enough on its own, but together it formed something I could not ignore anymore. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the receipt. Again, unfolded it, and studied it like it might change if I looked long enough, but it stayed the same, precise, factual, indifferent to how I felt about it, and that was when something shifted inside me, not a surge of anger, not a wave of emotion, just a decision forming quietly. I was not going to confront her without understanding the full picture, because this was not about catching her in a lie. It was about uncovering how deep the situation went, and how long it had been built without me. Noticing, I stood up, walked to the closet, and looked at her side, clothes neatly arranged, everything in place, and I realized that whatever she had been doing, she had been careful, consistent, controlled. Which meant I needed to be the same if I wanted the truth. I went back downstairs, opened my laptop again, and began mapping out what I knew, the date, the time, the location, the charge, the name, each detail placed where it belonged, because in my line of work patterns reveal themselves when you stop guessing and start documenting, and as I sat there building that timeline piece by piece, I understood something clearly for the first time since this started. I was no longer reacting to what had happened, I was preparing for what I was about to find next, and whatever that was, it was not going to be simple. Because nothing about this had been simple from the moment my name showed up somewhere it never should have been. By the time the sun started to drop behind the houses across the street, I had already gone through 3 months of our financial records, and what I found was not loud, it was not reckless, it was quiet, controlled, almost careful enough to be missed if you were not looking for it. Small charges spaced out just enough to avoid patterns, different locations, different days, nothing that would stand out on its own. But together they formed something undeniable, a rhythm that did not belong to the life I thought we were living. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes for a moment, not out of exhaustion but to let the pieces settle into place without forcing them, because forcing a conclusion too early is how you miss what matters, and I was past the point of guessing. I needed to understand the structure of this, not just the surface. When Olivia's car pulled into the driveway I heard it before I saw it. The familiar sound of tires rolling over the slight crack near the curb. The engine shutting off, the door closing with that same controlled motion she always used, nothing rushed, nothing careless. I stayed where I was, laptop open, screen dimmed, posture relaxed, because whatever I felt inside, she was not going to see it, not yet. She walked in, set her keys down, called out my name the way she always did, light, almost automatic, and I answered from the kitchen like nothing had changed. Like I had not spent the entire day reconstructing a version of her life that existed parallel to mine. She asked about my day. I said it was busy. She nodded, said hers was the same, and there it was again, that word, same, as if repetition could make something true. We moved through the evening like we always did, dinner, small talk, the kind of routine that feels safe until you realize it is just well practiced. I watched her carefully without making it obvious. The way she checked her phone briefly then turned it face down, the way she kept her tone steady, the way nothing in her behavior suggested she was carrying anything heavier than a normal day. And that was the detail that stayed with me the most, not the lie, not the receipt, but the consistency. Because consistency like that does not come from improvisation, it comes from repetition, from doing something enough times that it becomes part of you. After dinner she went upstairs to shower, and I stayed behind in the kitchen, staring at the reflection of the room in the dark window, and I realized something that shifted everything again. This was not new, it could not be, not with this level of control, not with this level of calm. Whatever Olivia had been doing, she had been doing it long enough to normalize it, to integrate it into her life without it showing on the surface, and that meant I was not just uncovering a moment. I was uncovering a timeline that stretched further back than I had allowed myself to consider. I stood there for a long time, not moving. Just letting that realization settle, because once you accept that something has been happening longer than you thought, you stop asking if it is real and start asking how far it goes. And as the water started running upstairs and the house filled with that familiar sound, I knew I was no longer looking for proof. I already had that. What I needed now was the full picture. And the only way to get it was to keep going without letting her know how much I had already seen. That night I did not sleep, not in the way people think of sleep, where your mind shuts down and your body follows. Instead I lay there with my eyes closed, breathing steady, listening to the quiet rhythm of Olivia beside me, the same rhythm that used to mean comfort but now felt like something I needed to study, measure, understand. Because everything about this had turned into data whether I wanted it to or not. Around 2 in the morning I opened my eyes and stared at the ceiling, letting the darkness settle in. And I made a decision that felt less like a choice and more like a necessary next step. If I wanted the truth I could not rely on what she said or what I assumed. I needed something objective. Something that did not adjust itself to protect anyone. The next morning I left the house at the same time as always, routine intact, nothing out of place. But instead of heading straight to the office I stopped at an electronics store 10 minutes away, the kind of place I had not needed in years. I walked in, kept my expression neutral, and asked for something simple, discreet, something that would not draw attention. The employee showed me a few options, small devices, easy to install, designed for people who wanted to monitor without being obvious. I chose one without overthinking it, paid in cash, and left with a small bag that felt heavier than it should have, not because of what it was, but because of what it represented. When I got back home the house was empty, quiet, predictable, and I moved through it with a kind of focus I had not felt in a long time. I placed the device where it would give me a clear view of the main living area, not hidden in a way that felt invasive, but positioned carefully, intentionally. Like placing a sensor on a structure you suspect is under stress. Then I stepped back and looked at it, not as a husband but as someone verifying a system, making sure everything was aligned, everything was functional. I checked the connection, confirmed the feed worked on my phone, and for a moment I just stood there holding the device, staring at the screen. Watching an empty room that no longer felt empty, because now it held the potential to show me something I had not been allowed to see before. I went to work after that, sat through meetings, answered emails, spoke to clients, all the normal things that made up my day, but underneath all of it, there was a quiet awareness running in the background, like a second layer of focus I could not turn off. Every hour or so I checked the feed, not obsessively, not constantly, just enough to confirm that what I had set in motion was still there, still recording, still waiting. And each time I looked at that screen and saw nothing unusual, just the stillness of an empty room, I felt something strange, not relief, not disappointment. Just a growing certainty that whatever I was looking for was not going to reveal itself all at once. it was going to appear the same way everything else had, in pieces, in moments that only made sense when you stepped back and saw the whole pattern. And as the day moved forward and the sun began to set again, I understood something clearly. I was no longer reacting to suspicion, I was building a process, and processes do not depend on emotion, they depend on consistency. And if Olivia had built hers over time, quietly, carefully, then I would do the same. Not louder, not faster, just more precise, because in the end precision is what exposes the truth, and I had reached the point where the truth was the only thing that mattered. The first real change did not happen with noise or urgency, it happened quietly on a Tuesday evening at exactly 7:23 p.m. I remember the time because I was still at my desk pretending to review a set of project revisions when my phone vibrated with the motion alert, not aggressively, not repeatedly, just once, like a tap on the shoulder, and for a second I did not open it. Not because I was busy but because I understood that whatever I was about to see had the potential to confirm everything I had been building in my head, and once something is confirmed it does not go back to being a question, it becomes reality. I picked up the phone, unlocked it, and opened the feed. The camera angle was exactly as I had set it, steady, clear, showing the living room with the front door just within frame, and there she was, Olivia, walking in, placing her bag down, moving through the space like she always did. Nothing rushed, nothing unusual, and for a moment I felt that familiar hesitation, the part of me that wanted this to end right there with nothing more than a normal evening unfolding, but then she paused, not in a dramatic way, just a small hesitation near the doorway, and she turned slightly, looking back toward the entrance, and that was when he stepped in, not someone I recognized immediately, mid-30s, composed, dressed like someone who understood exactly where he was supposed to be. He did not look around like a guest. He walked in like the space already made sense to him, and that detail settled heavier than anything else. Olivia said something I could not hear, something quiet, and he responded the same way, their movements calm, measured, no urgency, no tension, just familiarity, the kind that does not need to be explained because it has already been repeated enough times to feel normal. They moved further into the room, out of the main frame for a moment, and I adjusted the view slightly. Not frantically, just enough to keep them in sight, and what I saw was not dramatic, not chaotic, it was controlled. They sat, they talked, their posture relaxed, their expression steady, and that was when the final piece clicked into place. This was not an isolated event, not a single decision that went too far, this was something established, something that had its own rhythm independent of me, independent of the life I thought we were sharing. I watched for several minutes without moving, without reacting, letting the scene play out the same way I had approached everything else, as information, as confirmation, because once you remove emotion from the process what remains is clarity, and the clarity in that moment was absolute. Olivia was not hiding something chaotic or impulsive, she was maintaining something structured, something deliberate, and as I set the phone down on my desk and leaned back in my chair, I realized that whatever I was going to do next could not be based on confrontation or reaction. It had to be based on understanding the full scope of what I had just seen, because now I was no longer dealing with suspicion or even evidence, I was dealing with truth, and truth does not require interpretation, it only requires that you decide what to do with it. That night I did not rush home, I did not call, I did not send a message asking where she was or when she would be back, because the version of me that needed immediate answers was gone the moment I saw that screen, replaced by something quieter, more deliberate, and when I finally walked through the front door close to 9 p.m., the house was exactly as I expected it to be, clean, composed, nothing out of place. As if nothing had happened inside those walls just a few hours earlier. Olivia was in the kitchen, standing by the counter with a glass of water, and she looked up when I came in with that same expression she had worn every other evening, calm, familiar, controlled. She smiled slightly and asked if I was working late again, her tone light, almost casual, and I nodded, set my keys down, loosened my tie, moving through the motions the same way I always had. Because the moment demanded consistency more than confrontation, I asked what she had for dinner. She said something simple, something forgettable, and then she added that she had spent most of the evening alone catching up on emails, And there it was, not a hesitation, not a stumble, just a clean, direct statement that would have been completely believable if I had not already seen what I saw. I poured myself a glass of water and leaned against the counter, watching her without making it obvious, measuring the way she held eye contact. The way her voice stayed even, the way there was no trace of tension in her posture, and that was when I understood something that shifted the situation again. She was not improvising, she was following a script she had already internalized, something she had repeated enough times that it required no effort, and that realization did not trigger anger, it triggered precision, because if she could maintain that level of control, then so could I. I reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out the folded receipt, and placed it on the counter between us, not sliding it toward her, not making a gesture out of it, just setting it there like any other object, and for a fraction of a second her eyes dropped to it, not dramatically, not wide, just a brief acknowledgement. Before she looked back at me, and in that small moment I saw the only break in her composure I had seen all day, not fear, not panic, just recognition, like she understood immediately what it meant that the paper was no longer where she left it. I did not raise my voice, I did not accuse, I simply said I stopped by the hotel today, and the words hung there between us, steady, controlled. Leaving no room for misinterpretation, she blinked once, then tilted her head slightly, her expression shifting just enough to suggest confusion, and she asked what I was talking about, the question delivered with the same calm tone she had used all evening, but now it sounded different, not because of how she said it, but because I knew exactly what sat behind it. I nodded once, not in agreement but in acknowledgement of the moment we had reached, and I said they had a reservation under my name, that I had the receipt, that the time and date matched the charge on our account, and that the card used was not mine, each detail placed carefully, not rushed, not emotional, just factual, and as I spoke I watched her, not for a reaction but for a deviation, something that would break the pattern she had been maintaining, and for a few seconds she held it together, her posture steady, her face composed, but then something shifted, not dramatically, not enough for someone else to notice, but enough for me. A slight delay before she responded, a fraction of a second where the script no longer flowed as smoothly, and in that space I understood that whatever she said next was not going to change the reality I had already confirmed, it was only going to reveal how far she was willing to go to protect it. She held my gaze for a few seconds longer than usual, like she was measuring how much I already knew versus how much she could still control, and then she exhaled slowly, setting her glass down with a soft sound against the counter, not dramatic, not defensive, just deliberate, and she said there had to be some kind of mistake, that maybe someone used my name without permission, that maybe the hotel mixed something up. And I listened without interrupting because the words themselves were not the point anymore, it was the structure behind them, the attempt to redirect something already fixed in place. I nodded once, not agreeing, just acknowledging that she had chosen her position, and I reached for my phone, unlocked it, and turned the screen toward her, not abruptly, not forcefully, just placing it between us the same way I had placed the receipt, and I let the video play, the timestamp clear, the image steady. Her walking into the house, pausing at the door, and then him stepping inside like it was a space he recognized, and for the first time since this started her composure did not break completely, but it shifted in a way that could not be undone. Her eyes stayed on the screen a fraction too long, her shoulders tightened slightly, and when she finally looked back at me there was no confusion left to perform, just a quiet realization that the version of events she had prepared no longer applied. I did not say anything right away, I let the silence settle because silence has a way of making the truth feel heavier than any accusation ever could, and when I spoke my voice stayed even, controlled, the same tone I had used from the beginning. I said I was not interested in explanations that changed depending on what was shown, I was interested in facts, in how long this had been happening, in why my name was used, in how many times she had walked through that door with someone else while I was still building a life I thought we shared, each question placed carefully, not overlapping, not rushed, because this was not about winning an argument, it was about closing a gap between what was real and what had been presented as real. She opened her mouth like she was about to answer, then stopped, and in that hesitation I saw something clearer than any confession. I saw the weight of everything she had not said up to this point. And I understood that whatever words came next would not change the outcome, they would only confirm it. I stepped back from the counter, not retreating but creating space, and I told her I had already spoken to a lawyer earlier that afternoon, that I had documented everything, the charges, the receipt, the footage, the timeline. And that from this point forward I was going to handle things the same way I handle every other situation in my life, with structure, with clarity, without emotion clouding the decisions that needed to be made. She did not interrupt, she did not argue, she just stood there, and for the first time since I had known her she looked like someone who no longer had control over the narrative. And as I picked up my keys from the counter and walked toward the door, I realized something that felt almost detached from everything else. This was not the moment my life fell apart, this was the moment it realigned with the truth, and truth, no matter how quiet it arrives, has a way of putting everything else exactly where it belongs.